On from the Center of the American Experiment. Hello, Bill.
Hey, how's it going?
The Senate is expected to pass today the trans refuge bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
We want to know what that means because I don't think it means a child can just show up in Minnesota and expect a gender affirming surgery. I would imagine that child has to be accompanied by parents who were denied such care in their state. Am I on the right track?
Maybe not. I mean, that's what the advocates claim, that what they're trying to do is provide a refuge for if two parents bring a child into the state from a state where these sort of treatments are outlawed, then they would be able to get that treatment without any kind of retaliation from their home state. But that's such a vanishingly small chance. I can't imagine a state going after a former resident or residents for doing something that's legal in their new state.
Mm-hmm.
It just is inconceivable. What's disturbing about the bill is there's a provision in it that has to do with interstate custody disputes,
Mm-hmm.
where there's courts in more than one state, including Minnesota, are not in agreement on what should happen with a custody situation. And there's a provision in the bill that would allow the court itself to take custody of the child.
The court in Minnesota?
Yes, the court in Minnesota could, on an emergency basis, just declare we are now the legal guardian of this child.
Dear God.
So what people who are opposed to the bill are concerned about is somebody's going to use this to say a third party brings a child into Minnesota, and what they're doing is seeking gender affirming care over the objections of one or both of their parents who are out of state.
So Bill and Nancy Nelson in Kansas are in the throes of a divorce, and Nancy brings the child to Minnesota and says, my child needs gender affirming care. I'm in the middle of a divorce. My husband disagrees with me, but I want this child to have the care. Could the court take that child?
That's exactly the situation that's in a court in California right now, where a parent in Texas, the father in Texas, had an agreement in Texas under Texas law that the child could not receive gender affirming care without his authorization, that both parents had to consent to the care.
Mm-hmm.
And the mother took the child and moved to California, where this sort of care is legal, and she's been trying to get a court in California to overrule the Texas court that granted the father a veto right over this. So that's exactly the scenario that seems to be in play. And if I'm correct, it's the same language as in the California statute.
Mm-hmm.
So your scenario of and I don't know if Kansas is the right example.
Whatever.
Florida, North Dakota. North Dakota outlaws this sort of care. If a parent brings a child across the border into Moorhead and wants to seek such care, and the parent back in North Dakota, there is a provision in state law in the bill, and the bill makes it clear that if there's doubt, if there's uncertainty, that they're to weigh in on the side of the parent and the child seeking the gender affirming care, to put their thumb on the scale. That's what the bill says. So there's a lot of virtue signaling in the bill where we're saying, hey, we believe in trans rights and we want to make sure that everybody understands that we're welcoming, et cetera, et cetera. With provisions that aren't going to have any legal force or ever come into play. But this provision that would allow a court in a interstate custody dispute to take custody of the child seems to be exactly designed for a situation where an out-of-state parent or perhaps both parents object to their child receiving gender-affirming care. And let's be clear, that includes sex change surgeries, hormone treatments. It goes way, way beyond just pronouns and affirming therapy. It's medical involved stuff with permanent effects. And this provision about the court taking emergency custody is very troubling. And I know there are people who think it's beyond just the out of state. There are people who think this is going to be used in instances where everyone is a resident of Minnesota and one or both parents object to the care, and this provision will be used for that. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but it's very concerning.
Well, we have not descended so far into hell that a 15-year-old girl in North Dakota can't show up on here on her own with a cardboard suitcase and say, I want gender care.
I wish I could say you're wrong, but I can't. This bill is very poorly constructed. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I read it and I'm confused what it means. I'm confused how broad it is. Advocates say, oh, you've got to be a lawyer to understand this, but there are activist judges throughout the state of Minnesota who knows what use they're going to make of this. And everybody says, well, you need parental assent to do medical interventions on a child. Everybody says that. But if a court says, I have custody of this child, or I'm overruling out-of-state court, it seems to me a doctor or a hospital would say, oh, I have no choice. It's a court order. So, I wish to say this is all virtue signaling and it's not going to, and parental rights are safe, but I don't know. I think a close reading of the actual language of the bill would give people who are concerned about parental rights, people who are concerned about unaccompanied minors, a lot of pause. And again, at every step of this, debate's been cut off and questions haven't been answered, but they're plowing ahead because they have the 34 votes to get it to the governor today.
Bill, it's happening right now. It's literally as we speak, it's happening at the Capitol. The bill will presumably pass the Senate at any moment, and then it becomes law in Minnesota. It's already passed the House.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, I have a question for you. This is John. How would an unaccompanied minor ever become a ward of the court or whatever is, what I mean?
The provision of law that they're amending in House File 146 deals with a situation where a child has been abandoned. So you have a situation where somehow a child the parents brought this child to Minnesota from some other state, left the child behind and left the state. I don't even know why this is needed in statute, but it must have happened at some point because that's what the statute allows a judge to assume custody of an abandoned child. The second provision of this law would be in the case of what you were saying before. You have a runaway teen who comes to Minnesota escaping an abusive situation where they've been subject to violence or child abuse, and they would go and petition a court to say, hey, take custody of me because my situation that I left in this other state was violent and or abusive. So again, this must have happened at some point. That's why it's in state statute. And what they're doing is adding a third instance in which a judge could take custody of a minor child who's been abandoned by their parents, a minor child who has been the subject of abuse, neglect, or violence by their parents, or a minor child who is seeking gender-affirming care, but has been unable to obtain it in their home state. That's what we're adding to the statute, that third situation.
What if you have two loving, interested, engaged parents who say to their son or daughter, look, sweetheart, let's think this through. Let's give it more time. We'll try to work through this every way we can. Short of reassignment of surgery, for example, but let's really take our time here and work this out. I wonder what's to stop that kid from claiming, well, they're not acknowledging my desires, therefore I'm going to Minnesota.
Right, and that's what this provision in House File 146 does. It equates a child who is seeking, and it's all from the view of the child. It seeks a child who is seeking gender-affirming care but is unable to obtain it is now statutory equivalent of a child who has been abandoned by its parents, who has been the subject of abuse, neglect, and violence from their parents. it's making, if you don't consent to gender affirming care, the courts in Minnesota will say you have in effect abandoned your child. As much as you think you are trying to be a loving parent and are concerned for their long-term health, that Minnesota law will say if a child cannot receive the gender affirming care that the child wants, then that child will be deemed abandoned by a court in Minnesota.
Bill, one of the reasons that I really don't have an issue thinking that this is exactly what the plan is here is a couple of weeks ago, we had in studio Representative O'Neill and her fiance here. And of all of the things that have been passed in the first 4 months of the complete DFL takeover of this state, I flat out asked, what's the end game here? And her answer was, they want Minnesota to become a sanctuary state. And that's why I have no problem believing that that's what they want here.
Well, this is exactly what's happened in Washington state. In Washington state, they passed the bill that they flat out say, all these scenarios that you've been describing to me is what it's for. A child, an unaccompanied minor shows up and wants gender affirming care. That Washington state explicitly passed a law that would allow the child to get such care over the objections of one or both parents. So they passed a law that does exactly that. And they were completely, the Democrats in Washington, they were completely out front about what they were trying to accomplish.
Yep.
They think it's abhorrent that the state of North Dakota, I hate to pick on North Dakota, they aren't the only state, has outlawed gender affirming care for minors. And if you're a child in North Dakota and your parents don't agree to it, then you can go to Washington state and the court will make it happen for you. So Washington state has already done this. You know, I would agree that this is the end game for Minnesota, and maybe it's going to take more than just this step that they're taking right now on the floor of the Senate. But that just seems to be the goal, that believe the children are always correct, the children know best, and that if you are standing in the way of the wishes of a child in this instance, then you are committing something equivalent to child abuse. And again, I hate to be so blunt about this, but I'm super concerned about this. And what I'm concerned, other than you guys, of course, is there just has been very little attention on this issue in state media. And when they do portray it, it's, oh, look, the Democrats are being very compassionate to these children. They actually describe this as enabling, quote, life-saving care.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so Orwellian in the language they use, being the exact 180 to 180 degree opposite of what is actually occurring.
Bill, and wasn't it 67% of all people are against this?
Well, again, we have to be specific about what this is. So we did a poll, that is, the Center of the American Experiment did a poll for our magazine, Thinking Minnesota, where we asked, among a whole bunch of other questions on taxes and crime and a bunch of other issues, we asked, do you approve of or disagree with the concept of sex change surgeries for children under the age of 18? That was the question. Sex change surgeries under the age of 18. And that's what we polled. Now, advocates for the bill on the Senate floor say, oh, no, this is about pronouns. This is about affirming therapies. This has nothing to do with sex change operations. It doesn't exclude that. They're very clear to say. But this is mostly about pronouns and love. But we polled the sex change surgeries for children. 2/3 of Minnesota voters oppose it. Only 22% support. And you can say, well, who are the 22% who support it? But what was interesting in our poll was more Democrats oppose the idea than support it. So even Democrats aren't behind this by and large. But there's a vocal minority who think that anything that goes under this banner has to be good and are supporting it, and it's going to pass today. And, you know, they package it with a couple other things that perhaps are less objectionable as part of a package that they're going to go through on the House floor today on a Friday afternoon when nobody's really paying attention. So, you know, that's where we're at.
Bill, you know the problem you're having and the problem I'm having? We're looking at something calamitous and we're trying to be reasonable.
Well, I suppose, but you know, again, it's just frustrating that I can see the forest for the trees, and I've been, you know, sounding the alarm, and I know you guys listen and lots of other people listen, but when I I'm on local media. It's all about love and compassion and believe the children. And I just see the future full of horror stories of this could have easily been prevented, but we were caught up in a mania.
Thank you, sir. I told you we'd be in touch, and I bet we will be again.
All right. Thank you, sir. I wish it was a happier occasion.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
This state is ruined. I'm not denying that there are cases, I would imagine, where where's Mary Moriality when we need her? Why do I feel like crying?
This is complete and utter madness. This is complete and utter madness that we are experiencing right now. I don't know how you could see it any other way. They were right. Representative O'Neill, and I forget her fiance's name, they came in here and they basically told us the game that is being played is they want to turn us being Minnesota, into a sanctuary state, and it's happening on all levels. This is a sad day. Sorry.
Well, people can be gay, and people can,
absolutely,
and people can have doubts about their.
Here's why you want to cry. The kid at that age, and I have an 11-year-old. They're confused. They don't know what's going on. They're vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
They're impressionable.
I don't want these types of legislators involved in the lives of my children.
I don't either. That's my job.
The Senate author, among others, is Erin May Quaid, Apple Valley Democrat. She's married to a gal, and they got a kid, and she's a community activist and worked for Keith Ellison. I'm just tired of this. This is the playbook. We are governed by activists. In this case, DFLers. And I don't understand I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I don't understand what they're after. I desperately am trying to be reasonable, and I was telling you guys off air, I don't think this means a kid could just come over here and say, let's attack my Johnson for me. I'm not getting that at home. I got to have this happen. I want to desperately believe that's not the case.